Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into a crime that, well, it transcends its facts, doesn't it? It's become this kind of gothic American legend, the 1947 Los Angeles murder of Elizabeth Short, known to history as the Black Dahlia.
Hmm.
Our mission isn't just, to revisit the cold case file. It's really about trying to cut through nearly 8 decades of speculation, all the rumors, to focus just on the documented truth.
Yeah, the hard facts.
The brutal facts, the investigation that was so compromised, and the cultural shockwaves that followed. We are going straight to the sources here.
And the enduring power of this case is exactly why we need that kind of precision. I mean, the murder of Elizabeth Short wasn't just another homicide. It was really one of the first major crimes in post-World War II America to truly grab the national attention.
Right. LA was changing then, too.
Completely. Los Angeles was transitioning, from this relatively quiet, oil-rich town into a sprawling metropolis. And this really calculated act of violence became this terrifying symbol of, well, urban decay and those post-war anxieties.
And still unsolved.
It remains one of the oldest unsolved cases in Los Angeles County. It generated this staggering list, over 150 official suspects and hundreds more people confessing falsely over the years.
That's the complexity we're navigating today. We have to sort through, the surgical details of the mutilation, the sheer scope of that media frenzy, which just torpedoed the police work from day one, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Sabotaged it.
And this constant, confusing web of conflicting theories, rumors, factual disputes. It's a lot. But before we dive into all the sensationalism, I think we need to ground ourselves in the life of the victim herself.
Yes.
Before she became the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was a young woman, and she had a short, pretty turbulent history of Elizabeth Short.
Okay, so Elizabeth Short, born July 29, 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. Her early life back in New England was definitely fraught with emotional instability. It started with a significant trauma when she was just 6 years old.
Right, that trauma centers on her father, Cleo Alvin Short Jr. In 1930, he lost his savings in the '29 stock market crash. And then, shortly after, his car was found abandoned near the Charlestown Bridge. Everyone just assumed he'd died by suicide in the Charles River.
Exactly. And for 12 years, her mother, Phoebe, genuinely believed she was a widow. She had to pivot immediately, becoming the sole provider. She worked as a bookkeeper, trying to support her 5 young daughters.
It's a huge shift.
Oh, massive. This sudden change from a 2-parent household to one just defined by loss and struggle that absolutely shaped Elizabeth's early experiences.
And beyond that family tragedy, Short also struggled physically, didn't she?
She did. She suffered from severe asthma and chronic bronchitis. It got so bad it led to lung surgery when she was only 15. And this health crisis becomes really key to understanding her later movements.
How sad.
Well, doctors strongly recommended she relocate to a milder climate, to prevent more debilitating respiratory problems.
Yeah.
So this necessity meant she spent the next few winters away from her family, staying with friends down in Miami, Florida. It's also during this period she dropped out of Medford High School, left during her sophomore year.
So you can see her young adulthood was just constantly marked by displacement. First emotional, then geographical.
That's a good way to put it. And then in 1942, that displacement takes a really bizarre turn. After more than a decade of mourning him, her mother receives an apology letter.
From the father?
From Cleo Short Jr. He was alive. He'd simply walked away from his life back in 1930 and was now living out in California.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, just imagine getting that letter.
Right. So Elizabeth, who's 18 by then, decides to take advantage of the doctor's recommendation and this chance to reconnect. She moves west in late 1942 to Vallejo, California, to live with the father she hadn't seen since she was 6.
But that reunion didn't last long, based on the sources.
Extraordinarily brief. Arguments apparently started almost immediately.
Yeah.
She moved out by January 1943. So, no, she never found any lasting stability with him.
Her time in California, she was holding down very small jobs, right? I think she worked briefly at the base exchange at Camp Cook.
That's right. But a really key event happens in September 1943. She gets arrested in Santa Barbara for underage drinking.
And this is crucial, isn't it, for the later investigation?
Absolutely crucial. Here's where this small, forgotten bureaucratic step becomes the absolute linchpin of the entire investigation years later. Her fingerprints were taken when she was arrested.
So when her body was found in '47?
Those old prints were the tool, the crucial tool that allowed investigators to identify her quickly. Without them, it might have taken much longer. The media storm might have started differently. It's a critical detail.
During her various moves, she certainly developed connections to military personnel. That was pretty common during the wartime years.
Very common. While she was back in Florida for a time, she met Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. He was an Army Air Force officer.
And they got engaged.
Sources indicate they became engaged via letters while he was recovering from injuries. He'd crashed a plane while stationed over in India.
But tragedy struck again. It's almost a pattern.
It really is. It mirrors that earlier trauma with her father disappearing. Major Gordon died in a second plane crash in August 1945.
So twice, a significant male figure in her life just suddenly catastrophically removed.
Yeah. Fast forward to July 1946, Short relocates back to Los Angeles. Ostensibly, she was visiting an acquaintance, a Lieutenant Joseph Gordon Fickling, who was stationed down in Long Beach.
And she spent her final 6 months in Southern California.
That's right. Typically working as a waitress, renting a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. Now, Hollywood lore often paints her as an aspiring actress, right?
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
But the sources are really clear on this. She had no known acting jobs. No credits to her name. That aspiring actress label seems to have been largely retrofitted by the press later on to fit a more dramatic narrative.
Okay, so that takes us right up to the end, the missing week.
Exactly. The last confirmed reliable sighting of Elizabeth Short was January 9th, 1947. She'd been staying with a 25-year-old married salesman, Robert Red Manley. He stated he dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel, downtown L.A.
And there were some accounts of her being seen there.
Some accounts suggest Biltmore staff saw her using a lobby phone, maybe waiting for a ride or trying to connect with someone. It's a bit hazy.
She was also allegedly seen shortly after that at the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge. That's nearby, isn't it?
Yeah, less than half a mile from the Biltmore. But after that point, January 9th, she essentially vanishes. Her whereabouts until her body is discovered 6 days later, on January 15th, it's a complete void, a blank space in the investigation.
And investigators tried to fill that gap.
Oh, they spent immense resources trying to confirm or rule out the dozens, maybe hundreds of alleged sightings that flooded in after the murder became public. But the reality is those 6 days, January 9th to 15th, remain the most opaque, the most frustrating part of the timeline.
And crucially, it means the killer, whoever it was, had nearly a week of uninterrupted access to her.
Precisely. Discovery and autopsy details.
The moment of discovery, then. January 15th, 1947. This is what turns the case from, maybe, a local missing persons inquiry into a national obsession, really. A mother, Betty Bersinger, she's walking with her child and finds Short's body in a vacant lot. This is in Leimert Park, Los Angeles.
And the scene itself, it spoke volumes about the killer's methodical intent. The body was naked, severely mutilated, and deliberately posed, just staged in this shockingly graphic manner. But the central forensic detail that horrified everyone and baffled investigators was the bisection.
Let's talk about that bisection, because it really is the most clinical, maybe the most disturbing piece of evidence we have about the killer's potential skill set.
It is. The body had been completely severed at the waist, right between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Medically, that procedure is known as hemicorporectomy.
Hemicorporectomy. That sounds specialized.
It is critical. This wasn't some crude hack job. A hemicorporectomy is a highly specific surgical procedure. It demands profound anatomical knowledge, precision, and the use of professional sharp instruments to cut through flesh, nerves, cartilage without excessive tearing or damage.
So finding this procedure performed post-mortem suggests, what about the killer?
It strongly suggests the killer had experience, potentially medical or surgical training, or at the very least a highly refined, almost practical understanding of the human body. Maybe a butcher, maybe someone with autopsy experience, but definitely skilled.
And the preparation didn't stop at the bisection.
Not at all. The body had been completely drained of blood. That explains why the skin appeared so pallid white as reports described it. This is strong evidence that the killing itself and the dismemberment happened somewhere else.
Somewhere controlled.
Likely in a controlled environment, like a bathroom, maybe an operating theater, somewhere drainage was possible. The killer then washed the body thoroughly before dumping it in that vacant lot.
And the staging, the posing.
Intentional. Theatrical, even. Her hands were positioned over her head, elbows bent, her legs were spread apart, and crucially, her intestines were neatly tucked beneath her buttocks. This wasn't a random discard. It was a deliberate presentation.
To the public, to the police.
Both, probably. Intended to maximize shock and perhaps communicate something about the killer's psychology, their sense of power or control.
The official autopsy was performed the next day, January 16th. Dr. Frederick Newbar, the LA County coroner, What did the autopsy definitively establish as the cause of death? Because there were rumors about torture.
Right, and we'll get to those rumors. But Dr. Newbar determined the immediate cause of death was actually hemorrhaging from the lacerations to her face, coupled with shock from blows to the head and face.
Close to the head.
Yes. Significantly, the skull itself is not fractured. But there was clear evidence of bruising and bleeding on the scalp. Severe, non-penetrating, blunt force trauma. That led to a cerebral hemorrhage. That was the actual cause of death.
And this detail, the true cause of death being cerebral hemorrhage, that's exceptionally important, right? Because it played directly into the later media manipulation.
Precisely. The police tried to use that later. Now, for the mutilation specifics, the face. Subjected to those horrific, deep lacerations, creating the so-called Glasgow smile.
How deep were those?
They extended from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, 3 inches long on the right side, 2.5 inches on the left, just brutal. And in addition, there was another major gaping laceration running 4.25 inches longitudinally down her torso, from the navel down to the pubic area.
Again, indicating focus, intentionality.
Highly precise attacks, yes. Dr. Newbar noted other injuries too. Ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck. That suggests she was bound either during the assault or immediately before the killing.
And superficial cuts.
Superficial lacerations were also found on her arms and chest. Less severe, maybe hesitant, maybe part of the process of subduing her.
What about the timing of the bisection itself?
The finding regarding the bisection was also key. The autopsy report notes very little bruising around the cut. That strongly indicated the hemicorporectomy was performed post-mortem, after she had already died from the head and face injuries.
Okay. The autopsy report also tried to address the inevitable questions around sexual assault and her personal history, didn't it?
Yes. The anal canal was noted as being dilated 1.75 inches, which did suggest possible rape. However, while samples were taken, they tested negative for sperm. So no definitive proof of sexual assault in that sense.
And it also addressed the pregnancy rumors.
It did. The autopsy definitively confirmed one point that was almost immediately swallowed by rumors. Elizabeth Short was not pregnant and had never been pregnant. This specific detail got lost almost instantly in the media frenzy that followed. Media circus and sabotaged investigation.
Okay, so here's where this case really pivots. It transitions from being a horrific homicide investigation into, well, a case study in journalistic malpractice, basically, and its profound effect on law enforcement. Elizabeth Short was identified pretty quickly because of those 1943 fingerprints.
Right.
But once the media got her name, all hell just broke loose.
Yeah, it's impossible to overstate the recklessness of the press back then, particularly William Randolph Hearst's papers. The moment they had the victim's identity, the race for an exclusive was on. A team of reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner, led by Wayne Sutton and Jim Murray, managed to track down Short's mother, Phoebe, back in Boston.
And the method they used to get details, it's just jaw-droppingly unethical even reading about it today.
It really is. Sutton intentionally deceived Phoebe Short, told her that her daughter had won a beauty contest in Los Angeles, just completely fabricated.
To get what? Personal details? Photos?
Exactly. To extract personal details, biographical history, family photographs, all before dropping the bomb that her daughter was actually dead, brutally murdered.
And the deceit didn't stop there, did it?
No. Jim Murray, one of the reporters involved, admitted decades later he was still appalled by the tactic they used. Then, to protect their scoop, the Examiner offered to pay for Phoebe's travel out to L.A.
Which sounds helpful, but...
But they essentially sequestered her when she arrived. They kept her away from the police. And, critically, away from rival reporters.
Yeah.
Preventing her from sharing details that might have actually aided the official investigation or given other papers a competitive edge.
They prioritized the story over everything.
Over the sanctity of the investigation, over the welfare of a grieving mother, yes.
How profoundly did that action right at the very start poison the well for the police? They were already dealing with this enormous public pressure cooker.
It fundamentally compromised the early stages. I mean, think about it. The police needed a clear channel to manage evidence, witness information. But the media's intense competition immediately introduced misinformation, sensationalism, conflicting accounts.
And then they fueled the narrative further by assigning her that nickname. The name Black Dahlia stuck almost immediately.
It did. It's often attributed, as you know, to wordplay on the 1946 film noir, The Blue Dahlia.
Right.
And the media narrative circulated rumors that the nickname came from her supposed preference for wearing black clothes. But the Hearst papers, already spinning this lurid tale, they portrayed Short as an adventuress, someone who prowled Hollywood Boulevard, essentially trying to justify the horrific violence by smearing the victim's reputation, making her seem like she somehow deserved it.
Disgusting. Did other papers try different names?
Yeah, the Herald Express initially tried to dub it the werewolf murder. But Black Dahlia just had that ring to it, I guess. It took hold. The sensationalism became so extreme, it actually started to actively interfere with police strategy itself.
This is where we see the police kind of trying to fight fire with fire, right? Using the press's hunger against the killer, potentially.
Exactly. The police strategy was to actively allow certain false reports to circulate in the media. Things like she had been tortured for hours, or had cigarette burns on her body. Things the autopsy didn't actually support.
Why? What was the goal there?
They did this strategically to conceal the true cause of death, that cerebral hemorrhage we talked about, from the general public. They were trying to protect specific details that only the genuine killer would know, hoping it would help them filter out the flood of false confessions that were already starting to pour in.
Did that strategy work, or did it just add more fuel to the fire?
Well, given the absolute chaos that ensued, it seems that it mostly just amplified the frenzy. And the killer, or at least someone pretending to be the killer, seemed to be enjoying the attention immensely.
That phone call.
Right. On January 21st, the purported killer called the Examiner editor, James Richardson, congratulated the paper on its coverage, and then promised to send souvenirs of Elizabeth Short.
Chilling. And those souvenirs arrived.
3 days later, January 24th, a manila envelope shows up, addressed simply to the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside are several personal items belonging to Short: her birth certificate, a collection of photographs, and an address book.
An address book embossed with a name.
Yes, embossed with the name Mark Hansen, who we'll talk about more later.
This packet is crucial forensic evidence, isn't it? It points to a highly meticulous criminal.
Extremely meticulous, because both the body and the contents of this packet, and even a handbag and a shoe, later found about 2 miles away, had all been carefully wiped clean. Wiped with gasoline.
Gasoline. What does that tell us about the killer's sophistication for 1947?
Using a solvent like gasoline indicates a very high degree of criminal sophistication for that era. This person understood fingerprinting techniques, understood trace evidence, and actively took measures to ensure that evidence trail went cold. They planned not just the murder and the disposal, but also the media engagement and the subsequent evidence control.
But they still tried to lift prints.
They did. Tragically, when investigators attempted to lift partial fingerprints from the envelope itself, the prints were somehow compromised during transit to the FBI labs back east, effectively destroying that key potential lead. Another dead end.
And the taunts kept coming after the packet.
They did. It reinforced this sense of the killer playing a game with the authorities, with the media. On January 26th, a handwritten letter arrived. Promised the writer would turn himself in. Signed it, Black Dahlia Avenger.
But he didn't turn himself in.
No. Instead, a bit later, another letter arrived. This one was different, made from cut and pasted words from newspapers, like a classic ransom note style. It said, quote, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified."
Justified. Wow. The sheer volume of coverage must have been overwhelming.
Unbelievable. The Examiner ran the murder as front-page news for 35 consecutive days. It turned the investigation into an absolute circus. The initial lead detectives, including a Sergeant Finis Brown, eventually and very openly blamed the press for compromising the entire investigation. Through their constant probing, their sensational reporting, leaking half-verified details, it was chaos. Suspects, conflicts, and related cases.
The initial police response, though, despite the media chaos, was immense. It really shows the immediate political and public pressure this case generated. We're talking, what, 750 investigators initially working the case?
That's the number often cited, yeah. Including 400 sheriff's deputies and 250 state patrol officers pulled in. A $10,000 reward was posted, which was a huge sum back then.
Huge. Despite all that manpower, the case quickly became defined by just the sheer number of false leads and especially false confessions.
Oh, absolutely. Over 500 people have confessed over the decades, most of them deemed wildly inaccurate, just seeking attention or mentally unstable. Sorting the wheat from the chaff was a nightmare.
So let's zero in on the key persons of interest. The ones who were seriously examined or had direct contact with Short just before she died. Robert Red Manley, the salesman. Last person to reliably see her alive.
Naturally, he was a primary suspect. You have to look at the last known contact. However, he was cleared after passing multiple polygraph examinations, lie detector tests.
Okay. The second major early suspect was Mark Hansen, the wealthy nightclub owner. His embossed address book was in that packet the killer sent to the examiner.
Right. Hansen had a known connection to Short. She had stayed at his home for a time with some other women, and there was testimony from a roommate suggesting Short had recently rejected Hansen's sexual advances.
So a potential motive there, rejection.
Potentially. It suggests a possible motive rooted in rejection. And despite that strong circumstantial evidence of the address book, which really implies the killer knew Short personally, or at least had access to her belongings, Hansen was ultimately cleared by investigators.
Too quickly, perhaps. Some argue that.
Some historians and researchers definitely suggest he might have been cleared too quickly, yeah, given the address book connection.
Now, the most enduring theory, certainly the most structurally argued one in modern cold case analysis, centers on Dr. George Hodel, a prominent physician in Los Angeles at the time.
And this theory was primarily brought forward and investigated by his own son, Steve Hodel, who ironically became an LAPD homicide detective himself.
That's quite a story in itself. What's the core of the Hodel theory?
It relies heavily on circumstantial evidence, but it ties directly back to that surgical complexity we discussed at the crime scene. Dr. Hodel's training as a surgeon is often cited as strong circumstantial evidence. It matches the kind of precision required for that hemicorporectomy.
The bisection procedure.
Exactly. That procedure, requiring anatomical knowledge, it fits within the profile of a physician, or someone with related training.
And there's more concrete evidence related to Hodel, isn't there, from a later investigation?
What's fascinating here is the evidence that emerged from the 1949 grand jury investigation. By then, the LAPD was under immense pressure for its failure to solve not just the Dahlia case, but numerous other homicides of women.
So the grand jury looked into police failures.
Yes, and that investigation led them to wiretap George Hodel's home. They suspected him.
And the transcript from that wiretap, it's pretty chilling.
It's perhaps the most chilling piece of, let's say, non-confessional evidence connected to the entire case. Investigators recorded Hodel talking to an unidentified visitor. And he says, quote, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead."
His secretary died, too.
Yes, he continues, "They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out, killed her. Maybe it did kill my secretary."
Wow. So that quote suggests Hodel was aware he was potentially a suspect in two homicides. Elizabeth Short's murder and the death of his secretary, Ruth Spaulding, who died under suspicious circumstances in 1945.
Exactly. It places immense weight on the theory. Now, it's not a direct confession, obviously. It's hypothetical, supposing I did. But it shows this remarkable awareness, this contemplation of the accusations against him regarding both deaths.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the investigation also seriously considered the possibility of a serial killer, right? That the Dahlia murder wasn't a standalone incident.
Definitely. That it might be part of a wider, terrifying pattern of violence against young women in that post-war era.
Some crime authors, and even some original police detectives like Peter Merylo, they suspected a link to the horrifying Cleveland torso murders. Those happened earlier, 1934 to 1938.
The victims there were often dismembered, sometimes drained of blood, decapitated. Very brutal.
Did the original LAPD look into that connection?
They apparently discounted that link back in 1947. Perhaps they were focusing too narrowly on local suspects, people known to Short. However, later independent investigations have re-examined a former suspect from the Cleveland torso murders, a man named Jack Anderson Wilson, who actually had ties to Los Angeles later on. It suggests the possibility, at least, of a transient, highly organized killer operating in multiple cities.
And there was another potential connection pushed by someone high up in LAPD itself.
Yes, Captain Donahoe. He publicly stated his belief that the Dahlia murder was linked to the 1946 murder and dismemberment of a 6-year-old girl, Suzanne Degnan, in Chicago. That case was widely known as the Lipstick Murders.
Why the link? What was the evidence there?
The evidence cited was striking. Handwriting analysis. Experts noted a near-perfect match in handwriting peculiarities between the Degnan ransom note and those Black Dahlia Avenger notes sent to the LA papers.
What kind of peculiarities?
Things like using a strange combination of capital and small letters, mixed together like writing, "burn this for her safety." And also the use of a very similar, distinctively misshapen letter P.
That's specific.
Very specific. And if that wasn't enough, there was this bizarre geographical coincidence that Donahoe pointed out. Short's body was found on Norton Avenue in L.A., just 3 blocks west of a street named Dignam Boulevard.
Okay, that's either a 1 in a million coincidence or some kind of extreme intentional taunt from the killer. using an internal reference almost.
He certainly adds another layer of weirdness. The Short case was also grouped more broadly under this frightening umbrella term the press and police used, the lone woman murders, which plagued LA roughly between 1943 and 1949.
What did that encompass?
This grouping included over a dozen unsolved homicides of young, often attractive women in Los Angeles. Many involved sexual assault and mutilation. This pattern of failure, the string of unsolved brutal crimes, led directly to the formation of that 1949 grand jury investigation we mentioned.
The one that wiretapped Hodel.
Exactly. The jury was specifically tasked with scrutinizing why the LAPD had failed so spectacularly to solve so many of these high-profile, brutal crimes over that 6-year period.
And to understand the immediate, chilling aftermath of the Dahlia case specifically, we only have to look at what happened less than a month later, the murder of Jean French.
Right. February 1947. Her body was found nude, severely beaten in West Los Angeles.
And the message left on her body.
Written on her stomach, likely in lipstick, were the words, "Fuck you, BD." Or some reports say it might have been "Fuck you, PD," as in police department. Either way, the media immediately sensationalized it, saw it as either a direct copycat of the Dahlia murder or, more terrifyingly, evidence of a continuous connection, interpreting BD as Black Dahlia.
But the pattern of violence, these lone woman murders, continued well beyond French, didn't they?
Oh, yes. Cases like Evelyn Winters, found strangled and bludgeoned in a vacant lot in Norwalk in March 1947. Laura Liza Trelstad, sexually assaulted, strangled with a belt in May 1947. These just contributed to this pervasive fear gripping the city.
Even labor disappearances got linked, didn't they? Like Jean Spangler in 1949.
Exactly. The famous disappearance of actress Jean Spangler. Her tattered purse was found in Griffith Park, contained a mysterious, unfinished note mentioning seeing a doctor. The press and public immediately categorized it as a potential Dahlia-type murder. It just shows how deeply ingrained the fear of this particular kind of calculated, savage violence against women had become in the public consciousness. The Black Dahlia case casts a very long
One of the most insidious and frankly damaging consequences of all that intense media sensationalism is the creation of these persistent myths. Myths that really obscure the actual victim, Elizabeth Short, and the documented forensic facts. Let's start with the rumors about her character.
Right. The rumor that she was a prostitute or maybe a call girl became deeply embedded in the public narrative. You see it repeated endlessly in crime books and especially in later fictionalizations.
But what did the official investigations find?
Contemporaneous grand jury findings, which journalists have since examined in the case files, reveal that there was actually no existing evidence that Short ever engaged in prostitution. None that they could verify. This rumor likely gained its widest circulation much later, probably after John Gregory Dunn's 1977 novel True Confessions, which used the crime as a fictional backdrop.
So fiction blurred into fact, another widely circulated and really deeply invasive rumor, and often contradictory to the first one, focused on her reproductive health. This idea that she had gonadal dysgenesis, sometimes called infantile genitalia.
Yeah, the rumor was that this condition supposedly made sexual intercourse impossible for her.
Okay, this is a complex medical claim. It needs serious debunking, right?
Absolutely. This rumor was likely spread, perhaps intentionally, to try and counter those concurrent prostitution claims. She couldn't have been a prostitute because she couldn't have sex.
So what's the medical truth as far as we know?
Well, the official autopsy report did note that her uterus was small. That's documented. But the claim that she had some kind of debilitating condition that completely prevented intercourse is heavily disputed by other evidence.
What other evidence?
Critically, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files contain records confirming that police investigators actually interviewed at least 3 men with whom Elizabeth Short had engaged in sex. Their testimony exists.
So direct testimony contradicts the medical rumor.
Correct. That testimony, recorded by investigators at the time, contradicts the persistent rumor that she was physically incapable of intercourse.
Okay, so we have intentional police misinformation about the crime scene mixed with outright media rumor about the victim herself. Let's go back to those physical myths, the ones intentionally leaked by the police to try and protect the real evidence.
Yes. As we mentioned, the police allowed false reports of torture, things like cigarette burns on the body, to circulate freely in the press. But if you read the official autopsy report carefully, there is simply no indication of those specific claims, no mention of burns.
So the police were using these leaks as a shield, but they took on a life of their own.
Exactly. Once those facts were reported, they became ingrained in the public's understanding of the crime, even though they weren't forensically accurate.
And similarly, that really gruesome claim you find in some later, more lurid crime books that Short was forced to consume feces based on supposed stomach contents.
That has been widely refuted by serious journalists who've actually examined the original DA files. Again, it's a sensational detail, often used to heighten the horror narrative, maybe sell more books, but it simply does not appear in the official forensic report from Dr. Newbar.
What's fascinating here is how the press's initial lack of concrete knowledge, combined with police manipulation, created these permanent voids. Voids that fiction then rushed in to fill.
Absolutely. Even the nickname itself, Black Dahlia, is another point of factual dispute that persists, even now. We know it originates somehow from the movie The Blue Dahlia, but the question is, did she bear the name in life, or was it invented entirely post-mortem by the press?
And there are arguments on both sides.
Both sides have journalistic backing, yeah. Some official district attorney's reports state quite definitively that the name was invented by newspaper reporters covering the murder. Just made up for headlines.
But others disagree.
On the other hand, well-regarded journalists who've researched the case deeply, like Larry Harnish, maintain that she actually earned the nickname before her death from staff at a Long Beach drugstore she apparently frequented, because she often wore black and maybe had dark hair, a local nickname.
So that remains unresolved.
It really does. This unresolved dispute kind of encapsulates the entire case, doesn't it? Even the most basic element, the name by which history remembers her, is contested. But regardless of its true origin, the media amplification took a potentially benign local nickname, if it existed, and turned it into this international Gothic label, forever overshadowing Elizabeth Short, the actual person.
And I think that's the core issue. The reality is that the fictionalized narrative of the Black Dahlia, the tragic, beautiful, mysterious Hollywood adventuress, is often far more compelling to the public than the documented facts. The facts of a young woman struggling with serious health issues, family trauma, instability, who was murdered by a very methodical, likely skilled, and incredibly brutal killer. That story gets lost. Thoughts?
It does. But while the murder itself remains unsolved, its immense publicity did have these profound, if maybe unintended, consequences, particularly for law enforcement legislation in California.
How so?
Well, within just 2 weeks of the body being discovered, the shock and public fear surrounding the case prompted C. Don Field, who was a Republican state assemblyman at the time, to introduce a specific bill.
And this was the bill related to sex offenders.
This was the bill that led directly to the formation of the first mandatory sex offender registry in California. It was passed later in 1947. So this specific tragedy, this specific wave of fear, directly accelerated crucial public safety policy. It shows the political shockwaves were immediate and long-lasting.
And the cultural endurance is undeniable too, isn't it? The case is just a permanent fixture in American crime lore.
Absolutely. It's inspired countless fictionalized books, most famously James Ellroy's novel, The Black Dahlia, which really uses the case as a launchpad to explore the broader corruption, the darkness of post-war Los Angeles politics and society. Films, too.
But as we've really tried to unpack today, these fictional accounts, these sensationalist myths that grew up around it, they often diverge so sharply from the tragic facts of Elizabeth Short's actual life and her death.
Yeah.
The level of detail we actually have from the autopsy and the staging those clear indicators of a highly meticulous, possibly surgically trained killer, those facts often get completely lost in the noise of the Hollywood adventurous myth.
And that, ultimately, I think, is the powerful takeaway here for you, the listener, to consider. The Black Dahlia case stands as this stark historical example of how media sensationalism, that relentless rush for the exclusive scoop, the crafting of a compelling dark narrative, can fundamentally muddy the waters of a criminal investigation.
And potentially let the killer get away.
Exactly. That myth, once it's created and takes hold, it outlives the truth. And it may well have allowed the true killer, whoever they were, to remain forever obscured by the very chaos the coverage generated. So final thought is this. What value do we, especially now in this current era of instant information, maybe misinformation overload, what value do we place on knowing the full, unvarnished truth of something terrible versus the undeniable, seductive allure of a truly compelling dark story?